Hello and welcome to my messy craft table. Today I'm just going to try and briefly run down with you how I've painted this enormous dice tower. It's a lot bigger than the usual prints I do. I tend to try and stick to mostly kind of handheld, hand-sized, palm-sized models. But in this case, I went big because I wanted it to also be functional. This isn't from the designer I usually paint models by. However, I will link the free file in the description if you should want to print your own. Now, I don't have a ton of information about the printer settings because my husband handles all the printing and I just do the painting really. But this print, it's so tall I can't get it all in one shot. But there, it's got a cool little moon on top. It prints in two sections, so the roof is one print and the rest is another print because it's so tall, plus the roof has an overhang, and in order for it to be supportless, it needs to print in two parts, but they glue together quite easily. I always do my painting before my gluing if a print is in multiple parts. That way it's a lot easier to handle and you can get into all the little nooks and crannies. Right, so as with all of my prints, the first thing you do is prime. Now I use acrylic paints, just regular craft paints, nothing fancy, nothing expensive. Usually I water it down a bit for the priming, but in this case, for a change, I decided to use a spray primer, and it's just a spray pot primer that I use for like Warhammer miniatures because it's best to spray paint primer those particular models because the details are so fine and you don't want to accidentally obscure any of them with extra paint. So just to see how it differed, I tried the spray primer. For something this large, to be honest, it doesn't make a huge difference. The only difference is really in effort and drying time. So yes, it is easier and it does dry faster. So not a big deal for me. So I primed it in the grey primer that I had, and what comes after the priming layer is the blocked in colours. I did brown for the roof and the roof of the turret, brown for where I knew I was going to be putting brown sand because it can the base color can show through, so you obviously want a base color that matches whatever textures you're putting down. And I put green down under where I was going to put grass. I allowed that all to dry completely. Ideally you want to wait a day between layers if you can. That's the key to getting a really good paint job, and it's really hard to stop yourself. I know once you get on a roll, but it really is best to wait until everything is completely dry between layers. So after you get your blocked in solid colors, you can start looking at doing washes and dry brushing for shading. Washes come first. The washes are to get into all these little crevices. You can also just block in dark color if it's something like bricks. I started on the roof and I just started adding in some darker shades in all of the cracks, in all the stones and the roof tiles, which I believe should have been like more slaty, but I wanted to make them more like wooden tiles to go with the copper accents. So yeah, I watered down some black acrylic and some dark brown acrylic, and I did washes, let them dry completely between the layers, so many layers, and And that was on the roof. Up here I just painted that a dark grey. Oh, you can't even see that. I painted that a dark grey at the top. And then for the bottom, I did all the cracks and crevices with dark washes. The next thing I did was I left the roof for a while. I focused on the bricks and I stippled, or what I call glopping. I took some grey paint, a couple shades of brown and kind of beige, and I kind of just mush them together with the brush. And let me see if I can get a brush, and I just stipple, so just just to get a blob of paint, kind of brush it off a bit on a paper towel until you're just using the very tip of the brush, and just stipple, so that gives you some texture as well as some random color variations to mimic stone. Now these bricks I did in a grey, and these I did in a brown, but the technique is the same. And after I did that, I cleaned up the edges. It's really important to clean up all of the edges in all of these little bits, and it takes forever, but that's how you get a good result. You clean up the edges, make sure everything is nice and tidy, and then you're ready to tidy up any washes that may have been obscured, or darken deep in the crevices with dark washes. I did it obviously on the bricks up here as well, on the roof parts. And then basically, I mean, it was a lot of work. I make it sound like it wasn't that much. Basically, you're ready for highlights at that point. But another, excuse me, I've got terrible allergies this year. Another thing I did that I forgot to mention was all these little arches. I really got in there with the black paint to make those shadows really clear and dark, because if you think of model painting kind of like stage paint, actors, actresses, drag queens even, it's like really extreme highlighting and contouring. Well, you're doing the same with your painting. You're doing dark shadows and light highlights. But the trick is to get a balance where it doesn't look garish. So yeah, there's actually quite a lot of black. I don't usually like to use straight black. I use very dark brown, shades of grey, but black is always used very sparingly because it creates just a negative space that doesn't look natural. So yeah, those are all my shadows and my washes. So tidy up the edges, redo any washes you need to do, and then you can move on to highlights. Highlights are done with a dry brush. Now, a dry brush is when you dip the brush lightly in paint and then you brush off the excess on a paper towel till it's just about dry. Then you just go over the edges very lightly over and over again, and each time you stroke, it'll pick up some of that paint. Now, you can do it with white if you're trying to get a highlight like over here, but again, as with black, you don't want to use pure white because that won't look correct. So it's shades of grey, and that's mostly what I've got here. And it's just the very edges of all of the bricks and things. And a model like this is quite well made, and it's very easy to highlight and to do all the shading because the shapes are all there for you. So so I did that, and obviously here too you can see a bit more up close. they're just highlighted, and in here it's just this bit here that's highlighted, and just the bits where the light's really going to catch. So yeah, I also, you can see it's a bit shiny, a bit shimmery. I have this metallic plaque that I like to use sometimes. It makes things look wet. So that was in one of my washes, and that's why it looks a bit shiny. I just thought it's like I wanted to make the bricks look like they're kind of covered in algae and just a little bit moist. So that's how that worked out. Now, on the roof, after all of my shading and highlights were done, I painted on the metallic bits. I wanted this to look like it was very weathered copper. And here too, this bit I left quite bright because I want the moon to shine. But here I put the copper and all of these kind of edges. So that was just some metallic copper paint. Then on top of that, I put a watered down dark green, and I also highlighted the roof with, well, it's not really highlights, I guess it's kind of like washes, but I applied it like a highlight with the green to make it look like there's all this buildup of mossy algae, and that also helped to weather the copper, because obviously as copper weathers, it goes that greeny blue color. So I used it all over the roof. And that's basically all of the building. It's just layers and layers upon layers of browns and greens and a touch of copper and some light grey. Now, what I like to do with my models, as anyone who follows me will have seen many times, is I like to use fake grass and like model bushes and things, static grass, which you can get at hobby stores and from hobby suppliers. Usually people do this for like their Warhammer miniatures or model trains. So what I used in this is just sand. I believe this sand actually came from IKEA. They were selling it as like decorative sand. So I just applied that with some PVA glue. I painted the glue on with a brush so I could get exactly where I wanted it. Sprinkled the sand on, tipped it off just like you would apply glitter. And I did that a couple of times to make sure that there weren't any gaps, but then it was quite a uniform color, so I actually used some watered down acrylic and just kind of blobbed it in and let it dry just to give it some variation and make it look less perfect, I suppose. In here I've applied little stones as well, just to give it a little bit more realism. These are model bushes and little bits of lichen. I broke the model bushes up into very small pieces and I glued them on individually. There's also static grass, which I made into tufts. And the static grass here, I don't have a proper applicator for it. So when I use static grass, I just apply the PVA as I did with the sand with a paintbrush, obviously after this is completely dry, because if this was wet, all the grass would stick in it because that stuff goes everywhere. Again, much like glitter. And yeah, you apply the PVA with the paintbrush to get it precisely where you want it, and you just dump it on and tip off the excess. And you might have to do it more than once to make sure you've got nice even coverage, but it's very easy to apply, very inexpensive, but it gives a really, really attractive result. This grass I like to use because it's a mix of colors. Sometimes I mix my own colors. I've got quite a lot of different types, but I think it looks a lot more natural when there's more than one color in there. And here I've just made some little clumps of coming out of focus. It does not want to stay in focus. It's just lichen and pebbles. And I just tried to make that look a bit natural with where I put it in different colors for a bit of variety. These vines I've got coming up the side are just little pieces of bushes that I applied one tiny tuft at a time. And I did the same, just tiny little tufts. And to make them trail, I had to wait for them to dry, and I stuck on another tuft. Waited for it to dry, stuck on another tuft. It gave a really good and sturdy effect though. And up here I've got some bits of mottle bushes, bits of lichen, bits of static grass in here to simulate moss. I don't know how well you can see it. That which is much shorter. I've actually got this flocking powder, green flocking powder that people use for fingernails. I'm not really sure what this was supposed to be, but I figured, you know, in this disused tower, maybe just some things fell off the roof and settled there and just grew. So I did that all around, and on the roof you see there's some grassy tufts. There's the hole for the dice. More tufts. And that's basically how you finish it off. And as I say, I printed this. Well, I had my husband print it full size because I wanted it to be functional. And let's see if I can find the hole without looking. Oh, no, because it's on the other side. And as you can see, it is functional. And, well, that's it. I guess this video's lasted a bit longer than I intended, but I hope you've learned something. I hope that you can try your own painting and get some excellent results with inexpensive materials, as I do. Bye!